Canada is the country everyone wants to move to, or at least it was. It might not be anymore. These days it's looking increasingly like the country everyone wants to leave. On social media site Reddit there are dozens of threads discussing whether and how to leave Canada. For many people, it's just talk, but for others, it's increasingly becoming a reality. Many of the people looking to leave are immigrants disillusioned with a country they were told is paradise, but turned out to be cold, expensive, and lacking in opportunities. Yet disappointed immigrants are only part of the story. Increasingly, those born in Canada are also looking to leave the country. These people tend to be young and skilled. If everything was running smoothly in Canada, they'd be sticking around, building careers, starting families, and buying their first home. But instead, they're leaving the country. So why are Canadian residents increasingly leaving the country, and where are they going? Let's break these issues down. First of all, Canadians leaving the country isn't actually a new phenomenon. For decades, Canada has been experiencing what's known as a brain drain, the phenomenon of high-skilled workers leaving to pursue better opportunities elsewhere. Traditionally, most of the people leaving as part of Canada's brain drain went to the United States, and the main reason was simple: better pay. Take, for instance, IT workers. The average IT worker in Canada earns the equivalent of $74,000 per year. That's about half of what the average IT worker makes in the San Francisco Bay Area. Even in less dynamic tech hubs like Denver and Chicago, IT workers make about 50% more than they do in Canada. That's a big reason to take your skills and move to America, especially when you consider that today the cost of living is lower in places like Denver and Chicago than they are in Canada's largest cities. And it's not just IT workers. The same is true for healthcare workers. One of the reasons that Canada suffers from a doctor shortage is that so many move to the US, where they can earn much more money. Another reason for the brain drain is that at certain times in history, the US economy was much stronger than Canada's, and there were far more job opportunities. For instance, in the 1990s, while Canada had an unemployment rate above 10% for year after year, the US jobless rate was between 4 and 7%. In those days, Canadians flocked to America for jobs by the hundreds of thousands. Historically, Canada has lost about 0.7% of its population every year to the United States, but Canada's population didn't fall because of Canada's high levels of immigration, which compensated for the lost population. But today, things are different. There is still a brain drain, but Canadian residents are leaving for different reasons. Starting off with soaring housing costs. On social media, those who left Canada have made it clear why, and their number one reason is the high cost of living. House prices have soared in recent years. For more on that, check out our recent video on Canada's insane housing bubble. Things have gotten so bad with housing in Canada that a recent estimate found that only 10% of the population could afford to buy a house in Toronto at today's prices. When only the rich can afford even a modest home, that's a clear sign your economy has become a failure. Even rents have become unaffordable for middle-class earners. In Vancouver, a one-bedroom apartment will now run you $3,000 a month, while in Toronto, it's $2,600 a month. The standard rule of thumb for affordability is that you should spend no more than 35% of your gross income on housing. For a one-bedroom apartment in Vancouver to be considered affordable, you would need an income of $103,000 a year. No wonder people are leaving the country. The second reason Canadians are leaving is failing healthcare. Many of those who have left Canada have cited the country's crumbling healthcare system as one of the reasons. In most parts of the country today, it's practically impossible to find a family doctor if you don't already have one. Waiting times at emergency rooms in Ontario now average 22.4 hours. That's right, you have to sit in a room for nearly a full day to see a doctor in an emergency. In other provinces, depending on the hospital, emergency wait times can run up to 10 hours. And waiting times for surgery are even worse. Many people facing life-threatening conditions have to wait 6 months or more for treatment. A recent study found that 11,000 people in Ontario died last year while on a waiting list for surgery, a CT scan, or an MRI. Simply put, Canadians are dying of preventable conditions because of a lack of healthcare access. Canadians have long prided themselves on the country's high-quality medical facilities and the universal healthcare policies that gave everyone access regardless of income. Now that system has turned into a deadly failure. On top of a failing healthcare system, there is a lack lack of infrastructure. Another reason cited by many is the country's lack of infrastructure. While Toronto and Montreal have decent public transit systems, most of the rest of the country doesn't. In virtually every other city and even in the suburbs of Toronto and Montreal, life is entirely car-dependent. Canada's cities are a giant web of freeways, boulevards, and parking lots. It's a country built for cars, not for people, and many younger people are getting sick of it. Canada has one of the most underdeveloped rail networks of any wealthy country. While residents of Europe and East Asia zoom from city to city on high-speed trains, Canadians get Via Rail, where slow trains run on tracks borrowed from cargo rail companies. Those trains often pull over to let cargo trains pass. In Europe, the distance between Toronto and Montreal can be covered by a high-speed train in 2 to 3 hours, but Via Rail takes 6 hours to make the trip, if you're lucky. Your alternative is to take an airplane, and for that you will pay through the nose. According to a recent survey, Canada has the world's 6th most expensive air travel, and thanks to a lack of competition, that has left Canada with just 2 major airlines, Air Canada and WestJet. Another reason Canadians are leaving is the ability of working from home. There's one major factor that has made it easier than ever to leave Canada, and that is the new phenomenon of working from home. During the pandemic, many offices shut down and employees were asked to work from home. This made both employees and employers realize that maybe they don't need an office at all. So long as there's an internet connection, they can work from anywhere. Even today, after the pandemic has subsided, many people in the laptop class, that is people who sit in front of a computer all day, continue to work from home. So why sit in a dreary office in Winnipeg when you can be working from the beach in the Virgin Islands or from a sunny apartment in Portugal? This is especially true thanks to the digital revolution that has created global freelance platforms like Upwork and Guru, which can match workers with freelancers anywhere in the world. And for businesses, it's never been easier to hire abroad. Upstart tech companies like Multiplier and Remote.com allow businesses to hire employees anywhere in the world without setting up a local office. Want to hire an accountant in the Philippines or a copywriter in Jamaica? Multiplier or Remote will take care of all the details such as local tax deductions, social security, contributions, and holiday pay. So in this day and age, the argument for sticking around in an overpriced Canadian city is falling apart. Canadians can go anywhere they want. But it's not just Canadians who are picking up and leaving the country. Many of the country's immigrants are leaving too, heading back home after realizing Canada is not the country they thought it would be. According to a recent survey, 30% of immigrants under the age of 34 are planning to leave the country within the next few years. Fewer and fewer immigrants are bothering to get Canadian citizenship. 20 years ago, 75% of immigrants to Canada got their citizenship within 10 years of arriving in the country. Today, that number has dropped to 46%. Fewer than half of immigrants even care about becoming a Canadian citizen anymore. For immigrants, the reason for leaving Canada are often different from Canadian-born residents. A big reason why immigrants leave Canada is high taxes. One major shock that immigrants experience is Canada's high taxes. Canada provides many social services, but the cost of that comes through taxes and social security contributions that can often eat up more than half of a worker's paycheck. In the underdeveloped countries that migrants come from, government services are few if any, but that means taxes tend to be low. Moving from a low-tax country to high-tax Canada often leads to disillusionment. Next is a culture of debt. Another reality about Canada that often shocks immigrants is the country's culture of debt. Canadians are the most heavily indebted people among G7 countries, and it shows. In Canada, people have enormous mortgages and large monthly car payments. They pay for their winter getaway vacations on their credit cards and carry large amounts of student debt for years after graduating. Many immigrants come from countries that have no culture of debt, and the idea of borrowing vast sums of money to live a normal Canadian life can be intimidating. Some choose not to take on debt and discover that without debt, you can't live the lifestyle that most Canadians live. They struggle with life in small rental apartments and drive old, used cars. Others get swept up in the culture of debt. They borrow for cars and houses and then face major financial problems when they lose their job or have an unexpected expense. To many immigrants, Canada's debt culture feels like a trap, and it's always a good idea to get out of a trap if you can. Another trap that immigrants find themselves in is the Canadian experience paradox. Many immigrants who come come to Canada discover that they're trapped in a catch-22. Employers prefer to hire people with experience in the local Canadian workforce. That makes it hard for newly arrived immigrants to land a job. But how can you get Canadian experience if no one will hire you? This endless loop means many high-skilled immigrants end up working in low-skilled jobs for far less money than they thought they'd be making. This is especially true for people in professions like medicine or engineering, where often local employers won't recognize foreign credentials. Those immigrants have to go back to school and get local accreditation before they can start working in their own field. And that means years of spending money instead of earning it. For many immigrants, it simply isn't worth it. Finally, there is the issue of weather. Let's face it, Canada isn't exactly a tropical paradise. The country has 3 of the 10 coldest major cities in the world, and the capital, Ottawa, is the 7th coldest capital in the world. Worse yet, it's only 7th thanks to its warm summers, which pull up its average temperature. If we looked only at winter temperatures, Ottawa would be the 3rd coldest capital, behind only Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, and Astana, Kazakhstan. In fact, the only part of Canada that isn't extremely cold in the winter is the West Coast. But there, the winters are dark and rainy. People born in Canada are generally used to the weather, even if they complain about it. But for immigrants, it can have a huge negative impact on their mental health. Among immigrants who leave Canada, one comment heard again and again is, "I just couldn't stand the weather." One question remains: where are these people who are leaving Canada going anyway? For immigrants, it's often back to the home country, but for those born in Canada, the answers are many. Going to the US for a job is still a popular option, but these days Canadians are often drawn to countries of their ancestry. Many of the countries that immigrants came to Canada from in previous generations have become much better places to live than they used to be. Think about East Asia, countries such as South Korea or Thailand, or Eastern Europe, countries such as Poland or the Czech Republic. Most of these countries now have strong economies, decent if not perfect healthcare systems, and a measure of personal and political freedom, and many of them have a much lower cost of living than Canada. If you can transfer your Canadian income to Thailand or Barbados, you'd be far better off, materially, than you were in Canada. It also helps that many of these countries have hereditary citizenship. This means that if your parents or grandparents were citizens of these countries, you might be able to qualify for citizenship yourself, making it very easy to live there permanently. Even if you don't qualify for citizenship in your country of choice, you might still be able to live there legally under a work visa. Many countries today that are trying to attract migrants have special visas for digital nomads or people who buy real estate. One way or the other, most Canadians will be able to find a way to live in a foreign country of their choice. All of which means that the coming years may be very different for Canada than the past has been. Thanks to all of Canada's problems, the country that once was a magnet for migrants from all over the world might just become a country where everyone leaves for greener pastures. To learn more about the economic trouble brewing in Canada, check out our video on the not-so-polite truth about Canada's collapsing economy. And if this video brought value to you, please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching.